everybody, and welcome to today's presentation, Art of Responsive Design, 5 Fundamentals to Master for Your Modern Application, brought to you by Logy Analytics. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter. Josh McClure is a software developer at Logy Analytics. He's spent time in various engineering and custom solutions roles at Logy, where he specialized in UI UX, custom styling, and tailored solutions. Well, without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Josh to begin the presentation.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. All right, well, everyone, welcome to the webinar today. Really looking forward to talking about responsive web design. Definitely one of my favorite topics in web application development. All right, so as Chris said, I am Josh McClure. I'm a software developer / solutions engineer / web developer at Logy Analytics. I've played many roles over at Logy, but at the end of the day, I like to think of myself as a really fancy web developer. So I just play around with code all day. So I've been at Logy for about 4 years, and I've been a web developer for about 10 years now. In my time, I have seen the landscape drastically change. I know, about 10 years, it's not really a long time in any given career. But of course, as you know, technology, that is an ancient career. So there's a massive amount of technology change that's happened just in the past 2 or 3 years. So what I'm hoping to do today is really arm the audience with tools and techniques that I've learned over my 10-year period. And I've learned that in a very hard way. Taken a lot of pain and effort to learn. So I'm hoping, I can give you some simple techniques and things to take away, which will give you the ability to design a responsive web application. All right, now on the agenda, we've got 5 points. We're going to start off with what it means to be responsive. Then we're going to look at leveraging the tools of the trade. Then we're going to move on to principles to keep in mind. We will then go into an application sample. I will live demo and build and kind of give you some practical wisdom to take away there. Then we'll end off with Q&A session. All right, so let's ask that question. What does it mean to be responsive? So you'll often hear responsive web design or see it written as RWD, and that is the practice of designing your web application to render formatted and sized content accordingly to the size of the screen that's being viewed on. In basic terms, your one application can look awesome on any screen size, right? Really, the goal at the end of the day when you're building a responsive web application is to not develop it for any one screen size, but to develop one single application that really flows and formats to whatever it's being viewed on, right? Now, when I first started in web design, we were still building mobile applications, right, or mobile websites that used the user agent lookup to say, what is this? Is it a small screen size? Is it a BlackBerry? Is it, some type of Microsoft phone? All right, if it is that, we're going to feed the mobile website version, which literally that was a completely different application, right? So if it was a normal screen or normal viewing device like a desktop, we would feed the normal application. All right, so I don't know if any of you out there in the audience had been through that very painful process, but I know for quite a period of time, I had to update both the mobile and the desktop sites and keep those both in sync. It was only a really big problem when you had large websites, but still very, very, very painful. So at the end of the day, responsive web design, it just makes your life easier, and it provides your customers or your viewers a much better viewing experience. So with all of that said, I do have another question to ask, and that is, when should we be using responsive tech in an application? Because it may not really be useful for your application, or it may not make complete sense to build an app with responsive design. So my answer is use responsive techniques when your audience is accessing the application from mobile devices, and only if the application provides meaningful value to the audience in a mobile context. So it seems like most apps these days should offer some level of responsive capabilities, but you really might not need to offer the entire depth of value on a mobile device. Now, we'll come back to this a bit later, but I want to go ahead and jump into the tools of the trade. All right, now since I work at Logy, I use Logy to build lots of applications, and we'll definitely get into this a bit deeper in the demo portion, but I want to start off by talking about how Logy has baked in tools to make responsive development a lot easier. First of all, Logy is a BI application development tool, or business intelligence application development tool. Makes it really easy to consume data from disparate sources, slice and dice that data, aggregate it, put formulas in there, and then feed it back to the front end so that you can craft a story and show visually to your end users what the data is telling you. So within Analogy Estudio, our developer tool, we have a lot of techniques and capabilities to work with. One of those is canvas charts. So if you're building a dashboard, or some content you're trying to embed into your website, you can use our canvas charts, and those are completely responsive right out of the box. They're SVG JavaScript charts, so they have all kinds of interactivity, lots of great features there. But at the end of the day, it makes it possible for you to build responsive visualizations that can be used on mobile or desktop or tablet, or heck, a big screen, right? A big projector screen. So really cool stuff. Canvas charts are great. The next tool we have is master report layouts. If you're a coder, you might know this as a template or a page wrapper. It goes by very different names across development environments, but essentially it is a master template, which you can say, here's my header, footer, sidebar, and this is the content placeholder area. Now I'm going to create this master report layout, and it's going to have all kinds of responsive rows, sliding panels. When I go down to a let's say a mobile device or a tablet, maybe it'll hide the sidebar and then show a hamburger menu up in the top left, right? So there are all kinds of cool things you can build with the master report layout in Logy specifically. And it makes it possible so that you can create your layout once, put in all the cool responsive features, and then reuse that over and over and over again for as many pages as you have in your application. All right, we'll get into some more practical techniques during the demo portion, like I said, but next we want to look at some frameworks that will do all of the hard work for us. So if you're building a website, or a web application, and you need it to be responsive, there are tons of free frameworks out there. All of the ones I have listed up here are actually completely free. They're under either MIT, Apache, or some other complete free licensing. So no commercial fees, no commercial license needed. It's really great, really awesome benefit to use these. So first one, probably my favorite, this is Bootstrap. If you haven't heard of it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It is backed by Twitter, but it is essentially a framework that has, an entire front end built for you. So you can kind of craft your own dashboard and application, but all you have to do is use the CSS class tags or HTML hierarchy that they provide you, and you can start building your own application and not really have to write any CSS unless you want to. Lots of really cool animations and JavaScript utilities in there. Again, I would highly recommend it. It's used by tons of websites out there, and if you haven't heard of it, you've probably used a website that actually does use it. So pretty cool stuff. All right, the next framework I want to talk about is Foundation by Zurb. It is, pretty much a comparable competitor to Bootstrap. I actually don't see a really drastic or defining difference between the two. I've used both of them in projects. I have my opinions and preferences, but I do very much respect and like the Foundation framework. I think it is a great offering and has a lot of features to offer. So between these two, check out which one you prefer, which one fits your development style better, and definitely let the framework do the hard jobs for you. Take advantage of the free stuff that's out there, and yeah, it makes life more awesome. All right, so to twist it up a little bit, I've got this other framework called Materialize. This one is fairly new, but what it does is it really implements Google's material design strategy, but it also offers a ton of cool visual effects, which are designed for any screen size. So, they've got some really cool things, like when you click on a button, kind of shows this fancy little wave animation. But it also has, sliding sidebars, modal pop-ups, all kinds of really fancy stuff. It makes it look like you've done a ton of work and put in a lot of effort, when all you did really was maybe put in the CSS page and linked up the JavaScript and put a class on this div layer. Right? Does a lot of heavy lifting for you. All right, now let's go to the opposite side of the spectrum with Skeleton. This is a bare bones CSS library. It makes it possible for you to utilize all of this responsive logic, but it doesn't have any fancy styling or animations. Right? So it gives you the bare bones of what you need, hence the name Skeleton, and can really be used as a boilerplate to create your own CSS framework or library. All right, so I've built some stuff. Now, how do I test it? And this next tool is all about the tools we use as developers to actually check out our applications in real time to see how they're performing or working on smaller screen sizes. The most essential tool for me is Google Chrome. I use the browser development tools. This has got a bunch of great features. It can give me information on how it's performing over slow networks, fast networks, 3G throttling, all kinds of really cool little components in here. But it also has a device emulator, which is absolutely essential to my responsive design development. So, I'm not a very wealthy person, so I don't have the money to go out and buy a device from Samsung and HTC and Apple and this and that. So, I have Google Chrome, and I can actually emulate virtually any device out there, and it makes it really easy for me to switch and compare, and rotate my screen and all that stuff, right? So we'll get into that a little bit later in the demo portion, but those are the main tools that I use out there. All right, so we're jumping to the next section, which is principles to keep in mind. All right, so I love to use these principles and rely on them because they're really generic, but they they help kind of frame what I should be doing and give me some direction and purpose throughout my development. The first principle I always keep in mind with responsive design is building a framework. Right? Frameworks typically consist of these key components: header, sidebar, content, and footer. Right? So 4 building blocks of any web application. Pretty simple, right? It's nothing big or scary. We can keep these in just 4 simple components, and then get into the gory details for each section. But if we look at it from a high standpoint, there's really just those 4 components in our web design, and that's really it. So build a framework. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Make sure to build from the beginning if you're going to build a responsive application. Build it from the beginning to be responsive, and that will typically make it a lot easier than putting in after the fact, right? You can always refactor your application to be responsive, but certainly if you have the opportunity to do it beforehand, I highly recommend that. All right. One of the next big points for responsive principles, use relative measurement. So no more pixels. Don't tell a div layer or box that it is 500 pixels wide and 600 pixels height. Those are not going to really be usable on small screens, right? So use fluid measurement whenever possible. Percentages are great. Remember that auto sizing is your friend. So let the content span out or increase to the size of the width of the parent container that it's in. All right, so if we do this right, the framework of the application should respond to the size of the screen, thus driving the size of the content. All right, next principle to keep in mind, show the important stuff only. All right, so when we only show the important stuff and hide everything else, it makes the application a lot easier to use, right? Google is a great example of this. I love Google. I love to showcase Google because I think they are one of the best illustrations of this out there on the web. They did a lot of A/B testing and all that stuff to get to this point, but at the end of the day, their main objective is to get people to use their search engine and to be able to use it easily without having to learn and understand, right? So, if we look at the Google homepage, it's just the logo, the search box, and 2 buttons, right? So pretty much anybody can use that. It doesn't really take much explanation or understanding. And by doing that, it creates a really attractive user interface, and it also makes it seem like they've really put a lot of thought and effort into it. So in a mobile context, this is a great design, and this is a great principle to keep in mind because it could help you with performance, right? So when you're in a mobile site, you might want to hide specific content that takes a lot of time to load. So that could save you or save your mobile users a lot of time and data trying to load a page, right? So kind of switching from loading everything to loading when it's requested, right? So you could have a button that says, maybe show me this stuff, right? And then it calls in, makes that request to your APIs or, pulls in that heavy content. So showing the important stuff is maybe a little bit generic, but it applies to the functionality and also the the UI, right? All right, so make use of pop-up windows, sliding trays, and other UI elements. If there are things that you need on the page that are crucial, I recommend hiding them and then having them available for the user at their request, right? So again, kind of if you have something that you need to show, click a button or pull down that sliding tray, and your content will drop through, and you'll be able to allow your users to use it. All right, on to the last principle here. I want to talk about white space. Right, so white space is our friend. This is a great principle and probably my favorite one overall. So the smaller the screen size, the more space is going to be needed, right? So obviously, if we're on an iPhone or some type of small device, we don't really have a lot of screen real estate to work with, right? I think the smallest iPhones are right around 320 pixels, something like that, right? So that is not much space at all. And if we, scale the site, a full application down so that it fits on that size, it's going to be incredibly tiny and probably illegible, won't really be usable, right? So if we create a responsive application, we want to maximize the amount of white space around objects so it makes it easy to navigate through the site. You don't want to accidentally click on things as you're scrolling through, right? So white space is good for visual enhancement, but also it's good for usability. All right, so just need to overcome horror vacui, that is the fear of emptiness or the fear of white space. Okay, now we've arrived at the super fun part of this presentation. We are going to build some responsive content. All right, so I've got three things, three objectives that I'm going to build today. I actually want to build a layout, and then I'm going to manipulate and kind of rearrange some of my content, make it responsive. And then we are going to build a responsive table. Yes, you heard it right. It is a responsive table. So we've got some cool stuff there. I do have to mention that we're going to be working within the Logy tool suite, but that's okay. This is not all of this is completely dependent upon Logy. There are a few cool helpers that we have in the studio, in Logy Studio, but a lot of this stuff is actually going to be driven off of Bootstrap, and it's one of the frameworks I had talked about earlier. So at the end of the day, this is really just CSS and JavaScript. So I just want to mention, that we are using Logy here. So what we're seeing on the screen is the Logy development environment. This is our IDE called Logy Studio or Logy Info Studio. Now, at the end of the day, it's a really fancy application development tool. Again, it's got to focus on business intelligence applications, but you can use it to build blogs, web pages, or really advanced data presentation applications. So pretty cool stuff. Let me go ahead and show you what we're achieving today. So this is the end result. Just want to give you a little insight into it. We're going to build this in the next 15 minutes, and we are going to start out from this page. All right, so I've already got the content built. I won't bore you with the details of how I built the charts and all that stuff. Just kind of got that working here. We're going to bring it to this point. All right, so you'll notice that I've got my UFO sightings and abductions data here. This is I think a really valuable dashboard here. We're going to try and figure out how SpaceX and Mr. Musk is really behind all of these abductions. So I think with this dashboard, we're going to be able to prove it. So we're on to you, Mr. Musk. All right. All joking aside, we're going to get into it. Let's start off with the demo page. So this page in Analogy Estudio, this is what we are representing the bare stripped down page with, right? So we'll notice we've got this, this label up here, home UFO sightings and abductions. Got this other label called abductions versus UFOs, and all the content below, right? So on and so forth. Well, if we look back in Analogy Estudio, we see that these are just represented by what we call elements. All right, so I can click on abductions versus UFOs. Again, that correlates right here to this label. We can see that text that's been put in down in the bottom right hand corner. All right, so Analogy Estudio, we use an elemental design strategy. Think of it like Legos, right? We've got this whole big library of elements. Each one does a specific set of functionality, but like Legos, you can stack them together and build some really cool stuff. So we won't be building any Temple of Dooms or Star Destroyers, or I don't know what else is there in the Lego universe, but roller coasters, right? We won't be building any of the cool stuff, but we're going to build some other cool stuff, focusing on the responsive applications. All right, so let's first start off by adding in our framework. Now, I do already have this added in. I've got my framework built. Just to save time on this demo, it would probably take a little bit of effort, more than we have today. So what I've done is I've just included the reference to that template, all right? And I have unremarked the template includer. So notice it says master layout boxed, okay? So when I save my application and I go back to my web page, refresh the page, bam, we see the font sizing, the colors, the header, all that stuff has been put in for us. If we scroll to the bottom, we'll notice we actually have our footer as well. Okay, so this is really cool. Didn't have to do a lot of effort to include the template, but to build the template, what I did was, essentially focused on four or five different sections, right? Different components. So first off, I included my CSS. This is just the same way you would do in any web application. You call in your frameworks and your libraries. Then you call in your JavaScript files. We're kind of using the basic stuff out there, right? All right, then for the actual content area, I built my navigation. So this is my header. Now, I won't get into the gory details, but what you're looking at is a visual representation of what Bootstrap requires for an HTML hierarchy. All right, so Bootstrap does require a certain HTML hierarchy for components to work. They'll usually provide you a code, code sample to work from. I recreated that code sample in Logy and then just applied the specific CSS classes and IDs that are needed to make it function. All right, so I did the same for my footer, and without getting into those really gory details, just know that these are the high-level concepts. I just reverse engineered the Bootstrap content. I built I built this application essentially using Bootstrap and then using Analogy Estudio to do the heavy lifting. But one could absolutely easily recreate this with a flat HTML page or whatever code language you want to use. All right, so we have got our framework added in. Now let's start making our content look really nice. All right, so on our demo page, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a div layer, a division layer, which will be used to center up the content. Now, we are going to build this page so that it's thin in the center of the website or in the center of the web page, but then when we scale it down to mobile proportions, it does actually respond and starts to kind of stack on top of each other, right? So notice the content scales down, everything stacks on top. Our menu goes into this little hamburger menu, so we can get that cool animation. Now we have one website which is viewable on pretty much any device, right? So to do this, I'm going to use a lot of the Bootstrap components. The first one is the container. All right, container is a great, very simple to use class. You just create a division and then put the container CSS class on that div, and then we're going to move all of our content into that container class. All right, one simple addition. Now we go look at our web page. And look at that, everything is right in the center. It's becoming a little bit more responsive, which is great. I didn't have to do a lot of effort. And because I'm using canvas charts already, those just automatically respond to whatever the container that they're in. So very, very easy to use, and that takes a lot of effort off my plate. All right, great. Now we are moving to the next thing. We've got we've got the chance here to arrange our content in any fashion that we wish, but I think just sticking close to our target. What we're going to do is put the pie and the scatter side by side. Notice these nice panels that we have around them. The panel title is in this gray box, and then below that we've got the white box with the visualization behind it, or inside of it. So this is really easy to do. Bootstrap version 3 is what I'm using, so I'm a little bit behind, but version 4 has very similar capabilities. Version 3 has a component called panels. Right? So to do this, or to use the panel, it really just requires 3 division layers. And on the first one, we are going to say this is the panel for the pie. And you know what? I actually have this. Yeah, so I've got this already remarked out here, but it just requires a few classes. So first there's panel, and then panel default. Oops. All right. And let's make sure this is a div tag. All right, so just those 2 classes tells this content that it is a panel. It should use these specific styles. And now the next thing I need to do is tell this div layer that it is the panel heading. All right, and then likewise on the third panel, or the second child panel, we're going to say this is the panel body. All right, so panel body is where the content goes, panel heading is where the label goes. All right, very easy. Now what I can do is I can just pick up the content here. All right, so there's my pie chart. I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to pick up the label for that, and I'm going to put it in the panel heading. All right, now if we move this up to the top of the page and we go refresh, what we should see now is this pie chart is going to be where the scatter is, and it's going to be wrapped in a panel. Beautiful. Look at that. That was easy. Virtually painless. So now I'm going to do the same with the rest of my content, and then we'll start formatting the layout as well. Now to make this easier, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste since I've already done this. No need to recreate the wheel, right? All right, there's my scatter, and there's the label for the scatter. All right, and then we'll do this one more time for the line chart. Oops. Okay, now the page is saved. Let's go back and refresh. Again, here's the before. We should see this wrapped in panels now. All right, looks good, but you know what? It looks like I actually didn't place that panel in the right container. That's true. All right, so it needs to go inside of container to be centered. All right, we have found our center. Perfect. Look at that. Content's looking good. Now we can kind of reformat this page any way we see fit. You know, according to the target end result, you know, I found that the pie and the scatter look really good when they're 50-50 on one row, and then the line chart demands a little bit more real estate so that we can use it. So I think it looks better when it's on a full row by itself. So if we look at this content kind of in terms of rows and columns, it does make it a little bit easier to design a layout. Now we have a tool in Logy called responsive rows and columns. These elements are really just to take on the Bootstrap 12-grid system. You know, pretty much every framework I pointed out today, whether it's Bootstrap, Foundation, Zurb, Materialize, or Skeleton, any good responsive application framework is going to have their grid system. Now CSS also has the Flexbox tooling, and that is pretty great. Requires a little bit more understanding and evaluation, but with some proper knowledge, you can use the Flexbox tooling to create a really slick responsive application that works on virtually any browser. Now, the grid system we have here is going to work as well. It is much more simplistic and offers great functionality. Now to start off, all I do is put in my responsive row element. I'm going to configure a few options. And then I'm going to add my responsive columns. Okay, so it's as easy as that. Oops, let me go back here to Development Studio. I dropped this up at the top here, and I'm going to put in my, I'm going to arrange my content where I see fit. So just by dropping those in, we should be good to go now. And look at that. Very little effort. It didn't take me much to build this page up. I could arrange these columns in many different ways, like I said. Maybe we have on a large screen, the pie chart only occupies 4 columns of the 12 that are available. All right, so small configuration change there, but now we see that our change is reflected on the front end, and when we scale to a mobile site, it pops and takes up the entire row. So very cool. That's just the Bootstrap 12 grid system. And we can also open up our development tools, and we can kind of test out different device sizes. All right, so over in the top right hand corner on the far left of your toolbar in Dev, you are going to see this little icon. It looks like a little mobile device and a tablet device or something. What it allows us to do is just switch between different screen sizes. All right, now it looks like I may have forgotten my responsive meta tag, which is not a big deal, but I don't think this page is going to work unless I have that in there. So make sure you put in your responsive meta tag. I think we can just pop that in real quick. Okay, let's see here. All right, so a little bit more effort. I won't waste the time here on the demo. We've got a few more things to move on to. Yeah, essentially this would allow us to just pop in our HTML, and say this is a responsive application. When we're on a, oh, there we go. That actually was easy. All right, so that meta tag is very important. Make sure you have that if you're going to build a responsive application. Okay, very cool. So we are going to finish up with our demo here by adding a responsive table. So this is a pretty cool thing that we have in the Logy Dev environment. First, I need to actually make a table. So let's go ahead and run a wizard here to add a data table. All right, I'm going to connect to my data source. I'm going to use, in this case, just a flat XML web file, which is already in my application. All right, and then the wizard is going to walk us through visually to help us build this, this table. So I don't need the summary, so let's go ahead and hide that column. That looks good to me. I don't think we really need to do too much else here. So we'll just go next. The wizard automatically builds all of the table content or table structure for us. We can configure it and change it. So I want to turn sizable columns off. And I want the table to be 100% width. Okay, so now if we go look at this page again, what we should see is a table at the bottom of our screen. Great, that's what we're looking for. We've got sorting, we've got paging, all that fun stuff here. Okay, but now here's the problem. Right, if I scroll down to a mobile size, we see that this this cool scroll bar on the bottom shows up. And by cool, I mean very not cool. So we want to get rid of that, and I think the easiest way in this case is to say, well, look, we've got these, these 3 columns or 4 columns. Those are really the important things we need to show. Everything else, let's just hide it. when we're in a mobile context. All right, so to do that in Logy, we've got an element called responsive visibility. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say for this responsive visibility element, hide for extra small screens. That is definitely true. And for small screens, yes, that is true as well. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and save myself some time. Instead of adding that to every single column, I'm just going to copy and paste since we know it's going to be the same. So we're going to hide the UFOs column, sharp turns, abductions, posted, duration in minutes, and we'll keep the rest. All right, with that simple addition, we save the page, refresh, and now we don't see anything different on the desktop version, but if we scale down to a mobile size, notice no scroll bar, and now we only have 4 columns, right? So the trick there is responsive visibility dictates when we should hide those columns. This is really great because, you know, we still have that data, right? That data has been loaded from the server and now it's on the front end, but we don't have to display it unless we really need to. And we do have other cool features in Logy where we could say, you know, add a plus button to each row. When we click on it, some little sliding panel will drop down and show us the stuff that we had taken away, right? And we could also have it so that there's a button that says more info. If we click it, maybe it pops up a modal window or links to a different page in the website. There are so many different options that we have here at our fingertips, but you know, this goes for any web application, right? Show the stuff that's really important and hide everything else if it's not, you know, immediately valuable to your customers. So specifically speaking, this is for mobile websites. You know, on a desktop, you know, I think for the most part, all bets are off there. You know, show what's important, but remember to keep in mind those principles and use the frameworks to make your job easier. All right, well, that brings me to the end of the demo portion. I don't have any more content to show there, so I do want to mention that if you're interested in sampling Logy or trying out you know, other applications that that we've built, you can navigate to this URL, logyanalytics.com/demo. There's lots of great content there to view. We offer a 15-day free trial, and that usually gives you plenty of time to build out you know, a sample application and get a feel for what the platform can do for you. All right, now we're going to move on to the Q&A section. So you know, definitely feel free to ask your questions.
Awesome. Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come in so far. As Josh mentioned, if you have any questions for him today, please be sure and post those in the questions panel. Our first one comes from Keith Mitchell, and he would like to know, how does your development tool compare with Adobe Dreamweaver?
Great question. Okay, so Dreamweaver is essentially going to build you raw HTML, right? I think the big difference between Dreamweaver and Analogy Estudio is, you know, what we're doing is we're building definition files that get fed into a rendering engine, and then the rendering engine is going to build out on the fly that HTML. So Dreamweaver is more for building flat HTML websites, whereas Analogy Estudio is built for building dynamic and robust web applications that can be embedded into your existing application. So a scenario that we do often see is, you know, you might have you main application built with Dreamweaver, but then for the really interactive and interactivity heavy pieces, you might build that in Analogy Estudio and embed it into Dreamweaver applications.
All right. We have a question from Ron. Would like to know how soon after today's presentation will the app be available that was mentioned in the slide with the link to, looks like, http apps.logyanalytics.com/responsive.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have that available, and Ron, if you've possibly seen this link around in other marketing material, we do have that application available. I recommend if you download the sample or the Logi demo trial, I recommend getting up with the representative or the sales rep or technical team. They can definitely deliver that application to you. So the app you've seen today that I built, that is free and available. We can provide that to you, but might take a little bit of help to get that set up if it's your first time running Analogy Estudio. So reach out, we'll definitely help you out.
Awesome. I've got another question from Keith here. Would like to know, can you use Python within the Analogy Estudio?
Great question, Keith. Okay, so you cannot use Python within Analogy Estudio, but what you can do is you can create an application container, which could be a Python application, and then you can embed your Logi content into that Python app. The cool thing about the Logi platform is, you can use it to build a standalone web application, or you can really rely on the parent app, right, and just use Logi for embedded content. It allows you to have a two-way callback with Logi. So, even though that embedded content is embedded, it's really a part of your application, right? So you can use Python to manipulate the way that the Logi embedded content shows up, or the way that it gets filtered or functions. And then likewise, you could have the Logi content listening for a click on a chart, and then it'll maybe change pages in your Python app or run a script in your Python app, right? So there's a lot of interactivity and integration between those 2 points.
Great. We've got a couple more questions here. If you have anything else that you'd like to ask Josh, be sure to go ahead and get those posted. And I did want to mention real quick, because I don't think I touched on this at the beginning, but Logi Analytics has provided a number of handouts that are available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. So be sure to grab those. That includes a copy of Josh's slide presentation from today. Our next question is from Mark. He'd like to know, do you have any advice for making a dashboard built for desktop responsive?
Yes, I would recommend possibly starting with a template if you want to really expedite your progress. There are a number of websites out there. One of them that comes to mind is ThemeForest or Wrap Bootstrap. Those are some really great websites. Their templates are incredibly cheap. I won't get into the weeds on which frameworks or libraries or even code languages you should use. I think that's very opinionated, but I've definitely found a lot of success with using Bootstrap and Foundation, like I said. There are lots of community postings out there with a lot of free stuff, right? So it kind of helps you just get a baseline, figure out what you are looking for, and then you can expound on that.
All right. Next question is from John. He'd like to know, should every dashboard feature be mobile responsive?
Good question. So that really depends, right? So if I'm trying to think of uh, an exact piece of content that might not need to be responsive. But let's say you have some utility or some table that just can't be less than 20 columns. It has to have these 20 columns. Um, it might not be the most useful tool in a mobile context because you might not be able to see all of those 20 columns in a true responsive application. So you could put some placeholder or replace that functionality with some lighter weight utility. Let's say the table is used to report your overall sales statistics, right? You could instead have just an aggregated number that says, here is your total number of sales for this date time range. Instead of showing us the row level details, just have the aggregated value for a mobile device. And then when you're in the desktop view, you actually have the row level details, right? So that's kind of a concept.
All right. We have a question from Vanessa. She'd like to know, what is the learning curve in Logi, let's say, for a front-end developer usually working with Bootstrap and Bower?
Oh, great. Okay. Well, if you're already using Bootstrap, the learning curve is definitely a lot smaller. Logi has a lot of training resources available. So I generally say to get up and running and building a lot of content quickly, I would say about 2 weeks of learning, maybe less than that. Just takes a little time to understand, the development environment and how to use particular elements. Because the library of elements is so large, kind of goes along with, it's the same problem that almost every other framework has out there, right? There's so much to offer, so much to use and know. You could be doing a certain thing one way, but there's maybe this function or this small thing that does all that heavy lifting for you. So it's really a matter of learning what to use and when to use it and what's out there. So, to answer the question straightforward though, I generally see a 2 week period of learning. Within that, growth is really exponential. The first few days, takes a little bit of understanding. Then after that, you're really building some cool stuff.
Great. Well, it looks like we got one more question here. This one comes from Jason, and he would like to know, with the device emulator that you mentioned earlier, what are the top screen sizes that you recommend testing?
Oh, very good. Very good question. I will actually point this back to this responsive design website. So these are the breakpoints that I test for. 1024 plus, those are, your typical desktop sizes. And then anything between 1023 and 768, those are generally landscape and portrait tablet modes. And then anything smaller than 767, that's generally considered a mobile device, either tablet or landscape mode. Portrait or landscape mode. So I generally keep those breakpoints and test for those.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. Josh, anything that you'd like to add here as we close things up?
Just want to thank everybody for coming out and checking this out. Really was it was great fun, and appreciate you hearing what I have to say.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank Josh for a great presentation today. Also want to thank today's sponsor, Logy Analytics, for providing the DZone audience with a great webinar. Lastly, thank you to everyone who joined us for today's presentation. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next time.